was she? And why would a figure as famously amiable as Sir James Paul McCartney harbor such intense feelings toward anyone? To understand the gravity of this revelation, we must journey back to the very beginning, to the roots of the man who would become one of the most influential musicians of the 20th century. Sir James Paul McCartney was born on June 18, 1942, in Liverpool, England, a city recovering from the early devastations of World War II. The second son of James McCartney, a cotton salesman and jazz musician, and Mary Patricia McCartney, a nurse, young Paul grew up in a modest yet musically rich environment. His father played piano and trumpet, nurturing a home where melody and rhythm were constant companions. Tragically, Paul's early years were also marked by profound loss. His mother, Mary, died of a severe illness when he was just 14, an event that would leave a lasting emotional scar. Despite this early heartbreak, Paul's childhood was imbued with creativity and curiosity. He attended Joseph Williams Junior School and later Liverpool Institute, excelling academically but truly thriving in the musical and artistic realms. He quickly discovered a natural affinity for the piano, guitar, and, most notably, composition. These formative experiences laid the foundation for what would later become his uncanny ability to craft melodies that resonated across generations. His family heritage, a mix of Irish Catholic and Scottish, Protestant ancestry, shaped a worldview that balanced spirituality, humor, and a sense of discipline. Paul's father often reminded him of the value of hard work, while his mother, with her love for music, instilled an early passion for melody and performance. These dual influences, practicality and artistry, would define much of his later life. It was during his teenage years that Paul McCartney first encountered the powerful impact of popular music. Inspired by the energy of Elvis Presley and the harmonic intricacies of skiffle bands, he picked up the guitar and started experimenting with songwriting. He joined a local band, the Quarrymen, which would soon evolve into a legendary ensemble, forming the early backbone of what became the Beatles. Education in Liverpool exposed him to more than just academics. It was here that Paul's love for collaborative creativity began to take root. He learned the value of timing, teamwork, and the thrill of public performance. A shy teenager in many ways, he found confidence and expression through music, discovering that his voice, both literal and creative, could command attention and emotion. By the time he reached his late teens, Paul McCartney had already begun to realize that music would define him, shape his identity, and eventually place him at the center of a cultural revolution. Yet, beneath the charm, the genius, and the emerging fame were complex emotional undercurrents, including lingering resentment and personal struggles that would later feed into one of the most surprising revelations of his life: the intensity of his feelings toward a particular woman. The journey from a Liverpool schoolboy to a global icon was neither smooth nor instantaneous for Paul McCartney. His early career was defined by long nights in small clubs, endless rehearsals, and a relentless pursuit of perfection. With the Quarrymen, he honed his craft, experimenting with harmonies, guitar riffs, and songwriting techniques. But fame was still a distant dream. Paul's first real taste of challenge came with the formation of the Beatles, alongside John Lennon, George Harrison, and later Ringo Starr. They endured years of rejection and uncertainty, playing in small venues across Liverpool and Hamburg. The harsh clubs of Germany, where performances lasted for hours on end with minimal pay, became a crucible that forged their tight musical cohesion. During these early years, Paul worked tirelessly not only as a performer, but also as an arranger, singer, and co-composer, often negotiating the band's creative direction. The breakout moment arrived in 1962, when the band secured a recording contract with Parlophone Records under the guidance of producer George Martin. Paul's talent for melody and lyrical inventiveness quickly became apparent. The release of singles like Love Me Do and Please Please Me captured the public's imagination. It was not only Paul's musicianship that stood out, but also his versatility. He could play bass, sing lead or harmony, and craft lyrics that balanced simplicity with profound resonance. Through the 1960s, Paul McCartney's career skyrocketed. He contributed to landmark albums such as A Hard Day's Night, Rubber Soul, and Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, collaborating closely with John Lennon in one of the most celebrated songwriting partnerships in history. His work with George Martin, often referred to as the fifth Beatle, allowed him to experiment with orchestration, vocal layering, and innovative studio techniques. Each project revealed a depth and sophistication that set him apart in an era of intense musical competition. Yet Paul's rise was not without its challenges. Creative disagreements with bandmates occasionally flared, and the pressures of fame introduced personal and professional tensions. Critics scrutinized every move, and the relentless touring schedule tested their endurance. In particular, Paul faced moments of self-doubt, struggling to reconcile commercial expectations with his artistic vision. There were periods when the world seemed to demand perfection while he wrestled with inner conflicts. Despite these obstacles, Paul's achievements continued to amass. Songs such as Yesterday, Eleanor Rigby, and Hey Jude became instant classics, showcasing his unparalleled melodic sense and emotional intelligence. Collaborations with other music legends and ventures into experimental projects further cemented his reputation as a polymath of pop music. Through perseverance, creativity, and an innate understanding of human emotion, Paul McCartney evolved from a hopeful teenager in Liverpool to a global superstar whose influence would shape generations. Yet even amid such triumph, personal tensions lingered, and one particular figure in his life would come to represent a complicated, almost inexplicable source of animosity, an element of his story that would later shock even the most devoted fans. While the world admired Paul McCartney as a Beatle, his personal life was equally complex, filled with love, heartbreak, and intricate relationships that shaped his emotional landscape. His first major romantic chapter began with Linda Eastman, a talented American photographer. The two met in 1967, and by 1969, they were married. Linda's unwavering support during the final years of the Beatles helped stabilize Paul's life amid the chaos of fame. Together, they raised 4 children: Mary, Stella, James, and Beatrice, all of whom pursued creative or philanthropic paths in line with their parents' influence. Mary McCartney became a respected photographer and documentary filmmaker. Stella McCartney achieved global acclaim as a fashion designer. James McCartney carved out a career as a musician, and Beatrice pursued arts and philanthropy. Through his family life, Paul found both inspiration and grounding. Yet his domestic harmony did not erase lingering tensions from his past. Before Linda, Paul's personal experiences included high-profile romances that occasionally attracted public scrutiny. His relationship with Jane Asher, an actress and daughter of a prominent theatrical family, was perhaps the most formative of his pre-fame years. They dated through much of the 1960s, living together for several years. Jane's influence on Paul was profound. She introduced him to literature, theater, and broader intellectual pursuits. However, their eventual breakup, driven by conflicting career priorities and the pressures of global fame, left a lingering emotional imprint on him. Paul's romantic life was also marked by fleeting relationships and public encounters, including friendships and collaborations with fellow musicians and artists, which, while less formal, shaped his understanding of love, loyalty, and betrayal. Yet within this complex web of personal connections, there existed one figure who, over time, came to symbolize a unique and intense emotional friction. Unlike the ephemeral flings or supportive partners who entered his life, this individual evoked a deep-seated aversion, a feeling that Paul would later admit bordered on personal revulsion. The circumstances surrounding this animosity were intertwined with professional interactions, public personas, and personal grievances. It was not a matter of scandal or indiscretion, nor was it rooted in jealousy alone. Instead, the source of this antipathy lay in an accumulation of betrayals, misunderstandings, and clashing values, events that Paul had, for decades, internalized while maintaining a public image of geniality and charm. Through all the triumphs and tribulations, Paul McCartney's personal life remained a tapestry of contrasts: enduring devotion to family, intense passion for music, and, hidden beneath the surface, unresolved tensions with key figures who had influenced or interfered with his life trajectory. One such tension would, decades later, crystallize into the very truth hinted at in the title, the woman Paul McCartney truly hated more than anything, a revelation that would astonish fans and historians alike. Who was the woman that Paul McCartney truly hated more than anything? After decades of speculation and careful observation of his personal and professional life, the answer lies not in scandal, but in emotional complexity, in the collision between personal integrity and perceived betrayal. In his own words, reflecting in interviews decades later, Paul described a deep frustration and resentment toward Yoko Ono. While the public often simplified their story into a narrative of blame for the Beatles' breakup, Paul's feelings went far beyond the clichés. Yoko represented, in Paul's eyes, disruption, an intrusion into a delicate creative ecosystem that had been meticulously cultivated for years. She was not merely a partner to John Lennon, but an agent of change that, intentionally or not, challenged Paul's artistic control, personal space, and emotional equilibrium. The intensity of Paul's feelings was rooted in both personal and professional dimensions. On a personal level, he perceived a relentless challenge to the trust and loyalty that had bound the four Beatles. The long hours in the studio, the fragile egos, and the intricate collaborative songwriting process were threatened by Yoko's constant presence. For Paul, who valued subtlety, harmony, and focus, this intrusion provoked a visceral reaction. He confessed in interviews that he often felt powerless to protect the cohesion of the group, leading to simmering frustration and, eventually, open conflict. Professionally, Paul saw his creative space under siege. The Lennon-McCartney partnership, the cornerstone of the Beatles' genius, was destabilized. Yoko's influence on John brought new experimental directions, avant-garde approaches, and a degree of unpredictability that contrasted sharply with Paul's disciplined compositional style. For a perfectionist who had devoted his life to crafting melodies that resonated across the world, this unpredictability was both challenging and emotionally taxing. Yet Paul's animosity was never about malice or cruelty. It was about protection, about the defense of a vision that had defined his life since adolescence. His resentment was carefully guarded, expressed through subtle remarks, compositional themes, and occasional candid interviews. Songs like Too Many People and lyrical asides in solo projects reflected a mix of critique, disappointment, and unresolved tension, a musical diary of emotional processing that only the most attentive listeners could decode. In reflecting on this period, Paul admitted that the hatred he felt was intertwined with profound sadness and loss. The breakup of the Beatles, the dissolution of a partnership that had defined his life, and the intrusion into personal space created a complex emotional knot. It was a mix of grief, betrayal, and frustration, rather than the dramatic vilification often suggested by media narratives. And while years later Paul and Yoko would express mutual respect in interviews, the raw, early intensity of emotion, the truth behind the headline, remains an indelible part of his story. This chapter, hidden in plain sight for decades, reveals not only Paul McCartney's human vulnerability, but also the emotional stakes that accompanied fame, creativity, and loyalty. It is a reminder that even the most celebrated figures whose music brought joy to millions wrestle with feelings of resentment, fear, and the difficult complexities of human relationships. As the decades progressed, Paul McCartney transformed his personal and professional challenges into renewed creative energy. After the Beatles disbanded in 1970, he launched Wings, a project that allowed him to experiment with songwriting and band leadership on his own terms. Hits like Band on the Run and Live and Let Die demonstrated a masterful blend of pop sensibility and rock ambition, cementing his status as a solo artist capable of commanding attention independently of his former bandmates. Throughout the 1980s, 1990s, and 2000s, Paul continued to produce music, collaborate with artists across genres, and perform to audiences worldwide. His albums, including Tug of War, Flowers in the Dirt, and Chaos and Creation in the Backyard, revealed a reflective and evolving artist, unafraid to confront both personal and societal themes in his work. Collaborations with Stevie Wonder, Michael Jackson, and later Kanye West displayed his adaptability, openness, and enduring relevance. Paul's personal life remained a source of inspiration and fulfillment. Following the death of Linda McCartney in 1998, he eventually married Nancy Shevell in 2011, finding companionship, stability, and renewed joy. His children continued to honor the family legacy. Stella McCartney became an influential fashion designer, while James McCartney and Mary McCartney pursued music and photography, respectively. Paul embraced his role as both mentor and patriarch, balancing a global career with intimate family responsibilities. Even in his later years, Paul remained acutely aware of his past, the triumphs, the losses, and the emotional complexities surrounding figures like Yoko Ono. Rather than allowing these tensions to define him, he transformed them into creative fuel, channeling emotion into music that resonated with honesty and vulnerability. Publicly, he acknowledged mistakes, celebrated friendships, and preserved the integrity of his artistic legacy. Paul McCartney's enduring impact cannot be overstated. He shaped the soundscape of the 20th century, transforming pop music into a cultural force with global resonance. Beyond technical skill and melodic genius, he demonstrated an emotional intelligence, a capacity to connect with audiences across generations, and a resilience in the face of personal and professional upheaval. His ability to transform heartbreak, resentment, and challenge into enduring art ensures his place in the pantheon of musical immortality. As we reflect on his story, the revelation that he truly hated one person more than anything serves not as a scandalous footnote, but as a lens into the human dimension of a man often mythologized. Paul McCartney was not merely a musician or a Beatle. He was a son, a lover, a father, a friend, and, above all, a deeply emotional human being navigating love, loyalty, and loss. Ultimately, Paul McCartney's journey reminds us that genius is inseparable from humanity, that behind the harmonies, the melodies, and the global acclaim lies a man shaped by love, conflict, joy, and sorrow. His music endures because it is honest, his life captivates because it is real, and his story resonates because it is profoundly human. In the final measure of his legacy, we are left with a portrait of resilience, creativity, and emotional truth, a reminder that even icons wrestle with feelings of hatred, loss, and redemption, and that it is precisely these complexities that make them unforgettable.